I'd like to share with you a brief look at an influential and I think important paper in HCI called Making Epistemological Trouble, Third Paradigm HCI as Successor Science. This is a 2011 article by Steve Harrison, Phoebe Sengers, and Deborah Tatar. And I think it's worthwhile for you to read and discuss and understand. And the title, Third Paradigm HCI, invites the question, what were the first two paradigms of HCI? And the authors sort of glance over that. They seem to suggest that human factors is the first paradigm and that the cognitive science revolution of the last 25 years is the second paradigm, but it's a little bit, that's a little bit fuzzy. But the question is, what doesn't fit into these two paradigms? And the answer is a long list. Participatory design, value-sensitive design, user experience design, ethnomethodology, embodied interaction, interaction analysis, and critical design all have something in common, that they in some way don't fit the first two paradigms. And what they have in common is that they treat interaction as a form of embodied meaning-making, in which the artifact, its context, and its study are mutually defining and subject to multiple interpretations. And this leads to epistemological trouble. And the authors define epistemological trouble as questioning mainstream frameworks that define what counts as knowledge. And at this point in the discussion, you may think of Thomas Kuhn's The Structure of Scientific Revolutions, a book in which Kuhn speaks of normal science punctuated by crises, which are paradigm shifts. And we're in one. Well, actually, the authors at first sort of say that we're in one. Later, they seem to backtrack a little bit about that. But anyway, in the early part of the paper, they sort of suggest that we're in one and ask how we know that. How do we know that we're in a paradigm shift? And they appeal to Agre's 1997 idea of generative metaphors. And these are metaphors that identify a research community and suggest particular research questions. And so the question is then, what is our generative metaphor? What is the generative metaphor for the HCI community? And the generative metaphor is mind as information processor. And that metaphor suggests research questions like, how does information get into the mind? How is it transformed once it's in this mind as information processor? And how does it get back out of this information processor? And further, it suggests methods like modeling mental activity via computer code and comparing human and machine inputs and outputs. And this is articulated in a famous book by Stuart Card, Moran, and Alan Newell in 1983, in which they suggest that human information processing is analogous to computational signal processing. And this book, The Psychology of Human-Computer Interaction, says that the primary interaction task is enabling communication between man and machine. And I think they actually did say man back in 1983. The model that they posited is a model of rational actors, a model in which operations can be measured in terms of accomplishment of goals. So now we wonder, what's pushing the envelope, where the Card et al. Model is the envelope. And the authors offer four ideas that are pushing the envelope. First, ubiquitous and pervasive computing and their use of context. And this, of course, invites the question of what is context. And to some extent, they sidestep that question and saying, that in various disciplines, context is seen as not generally specifiable. Second are workplace studies, particularly in the computer-supported cooperative work community, which see centrality of social situated action. Third are ambient interfaces and experience-centered design. And fourth is the marginalization of emotion that the authors claim has occurred in HCI research. So then what is the conceptual unification of these four ideas? And what the authors offer is feminist philosophy of science, which provides a lens through which to view these issues as representatives of a nascent paradigm where they stand at the center of investigation. And to introduce that, the authors have a few words to say about embodiment. So embodiment is a key underlying theme of the third paradigm. Our understanding of anything derives from our physical and social location as embodied actors. And doing things in the world is as necessary to thinking as is abstraction, leading to a view that leads to design support for action-centered skills and motor memory as much as the seeing, hearing, and hand control that dominates GUI interfaces. Embodiment can focus the designer's attention on physically shared objects. Embodiment acknowledges differences between the physical world and the digital world, such as the lack of an undo button in the physical world. The authors cite Paul Durish's assertion from the book Where the Action Is, that embodiment is a property of interaction. Successor science is a key goal of feminist philosophy, a form of science free of systematic gender, class, and race bias, and it can't be achieved when science is seen as a transparent form of access to natural reality. Instead, science must be seen as situated knowledges coming from particular points of view and generated through particular mechanisms, and investigators must be held accountable for these points of view and these particular mechanisms. Meaning is connected to the interactions and viewpoints, histories, and resources of those interacting. Here the authors invoke the book Plans and Situated Actions by Lucy Suchman, a foundational text in computer-supported cooperative work. Place is a central concept in the third paradigm, the place of people, of their interactions with technology, and the investigators researching them. Values are another central concept in the third paradigm. No one viewpoint is seen as universally valid, so approaches that consider and question values are needed, such as value-sensitive design, participatory design, critical design, and reflective design. Humble theory is a term coined by William Gaver and used by the authors to place theory in a supporting role in the third paradigm, drawn on along with situational considerations. Finally, the authors begin to define the third paradigm as mainly a fundamental epistemological shift. Subjects do not define it. Subject topics do not define it. Defining particular approaches as partaking of the third paradigm depends instead on the stance of the researchers to their subjects. The standpoint epistemology of feminist philosophy leads to change of the following kinds, according to the authors. And citing a paper by Xiaowen Bartzel on feminist HCI, they list four qualities signifying change. First, pluralism, or actually I think it's 5 qualities. Pluralism shifts from universal knowledge and typical users to particular knowledge and including marginal users. Participation shifts from a distant view of subjects to participation with them. Advocacy shifts from apparent neutrality to a recognition of political place and with it, engagement. Ecology shifts the scene from controlled situations to complex contexts. And finally, self-disclosure shifts from hidden to exposed mechanisms for generating conclusions. Returning to the theme of epistemological trouble, the authors make some claims about how HCI looks to them. The authors do not see a Kuhnian crisis that will result in a new dominant paradigm. Instead, they see epistemological trouble as an ongoing phenomenon, informing studies with a reflexive awareness of the limitations of knowledge practices as part of scientific practice. And the authors offer a couple of examples of putting old and new ways of researching HCI into dialogue as a fruit of this epistemological trouble. First, they describe a study of affective computing where an objective measurement of physiological signals was used as a prompt to elicit subjective descriptions of emotions. And rather than adopting either the signal measurement or the subjective descriptions as ground truth, the researchers constructed their conclusions from a dialogue between the two. Postcolonial computing is another example. Instead of the developing world as the topic of study, its citizens become partners with researchers and methods are adapted to make them locally meaningful. But wait, there's more. This brief look necessarily omits much of the paper, not to mention its references. You should read and discuss it in the foundational books and papers it cites to get a clearer picture of this emerging phenomenon in HCI. Thank you for your attention.